Evening, everybody. I apologize about the delay this evening for those who show up live. Had some technical issues, but we have those straightened out now. Now, tonight we have a lot to cover, so we're just going to get straight into it and not have a lot of preliminaries here. Now, we've been looking at Psalm 83 for the past few weeks, and we're going to continue that tonight. But the outline that I had planned is just gone out the window because of what's happening in Iran right now. Well, actually, in the entire Middle East, it's not just Iran, it's going on all over the place. But because so much of what is going on in the world today involves politics, and remember, Ephesians 6:12 tells us that the governors of the world are part of the problem. I want to remind you about left-wing politics and how that's at the root of much of the political issues in the modern world, and especially what's going on right now. The terms left and right, if you remember, originated in France and literally designated which side individuals sat on. Today in the United States, we tend to use liberal and conservative, although those terms have changed meanings over the years, and there are many so called conservative politicians who are actually left wing. And using party designations is also pointless because there are some conservatives and some liberals, both who tend to be in the wrong parties for their ideologies. Now, while left wing politics is the enemy of liberty and is opposed to everything godly and biblical, not every left wing person is necessarily intentionally evil. Just as there are three types of men, you have the weak men, strong men who are good men, and strong men who are evil men. There are also three basic types of left wing people. The first group are those that you should feel sorry for them. They're weak and they can't handle the realities of the world around them. They seem to be nice people, but they're victims of themselves, and they tend to be very naive about things. They tend to congregate together. They don't understand that most of their problems are a result of their own behaviors, and there tends to be a certain physical appearance to this group, but not uniformly so. Now, the second group is the bigger problem. They're the ones that make you angry. The first group makes you frustrated because they don't do it on purpose. It's frustrating. But the second group is on a mission to save the world. To them, the world is broken and they have the solution, so they will use any means, including violence, to fix the problems. Now, almost all of them are atheists and they love communism and its various flavors of socialism. But since they're atheistic, they fill their emptiness by commitment to the God of the left, which is the government, tends to be the government. Everybody wants to be part of something bigger, and as believers, we are part of something bigger. We're part of the church. It's something that's so big that there is nothing bigger. But many people don't like that solution, so they seek another answer. They want to belong to something bigger. And this second group thinks that the West has been on the wrong track for hundreds of years, but with their solution, they can bring order and control through a new world order. Now, this group tends to be blind to history or dismissive of it if they're aware of it by saying, oh, it'll be different this time. Now, the third group, they're actually probably more dangerous than the second group. They're downright evil. They simply want power, and they recognize this path as the way to achieve that. Now, some people say they're after money, and that's true to the extent that money will buy you power. With enough money, they can buy love, they can buy a family, they can buy power, and they can buy anything else they want. If you have $1 billion, everybody suddenly wants to be your friend. And the only way that you can be sure that your spouse is with you for something other than the money is if they married you before you had the money and power. And whenever I was talking to my wife of 37 years about this, she looked at me, she said, well, when are you going to get your first billion? Yeah, we're still waiting on that. But this third group wants to control others. They think that they're entitled to control others because they're obviously smarter, right? And they may or may not be smarter, but they're evil, they're sick, and they're twisted people. They're often cowards. And the only thing worse than a coward is a coward with power. And this is the group that causes the problems in the world because those problems will give them power. You can achieve power through the problems of others. And this is where we find ourselves in our current situation in the world. Now, if this problem had been dealt with in 1979, we wouldn't be having this problem today. Of course, as believers and studiers of prophecy, we know prophecy and we know that we will have this problem today. But the lack of action in 1979 is what led to the problems of today. And of course, that lack of action was an action that benefited those who are in power. It's all tied together. And the prophecies speak of the results, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about the means of how to get to those results. Now, when you look at this situation that's going on, you might be disturbed at what you see is going on. And I would suggest that if you're not disturbed, you're either not paying attention or there's something wrong with you. And disturbed might not really be the right word because we know that it's going to happen, but it's still a bit confusing. It is upsetting. And that's because we're no longer in a world of traditional warfare. Now, a few weeks back, we mentioned that there were different generations of warfare, and I said we'd come back to it. And we could probably talk about this for an hour and still have a long way to go, but I want us to cover it enough to have a reasonable understanding. The four generations of warfare concept was first introduced by a group of military analysts who included William S. Lynn. Now, the first generation warfare is focused on mass manpower in line and column formations. The American Revolution was going badly for the Americans when they attempted to meet the British on these terms, but when they reformed and started using different tactics, that's when we won. We got out of the first generation warfare mindset, which controlled the world at the time. All the classic wars were fought this way, including those under Napoleon. It's all neat and tidy. You just send out thousands of people, they stand in nice rows, and they shoot at each other, and whoever has the most people left standing, they win. Not really a great way to fight wars unless you're the biggest army. Now, second generation warfare was more focused on firepower and indirect fire tactics. Now, this was prominent in World War I. In order to win, you have to have bigger and more guns or bigger and better weapons, which may or may not be guns. And I find it interesting that the idea of a war that could destroy all mankind as spoken of in the Bible was incomprehensible until the U.S. War for Southern Independence. But World War I really drove home the idea that humanity can now destroy ourselves through war. About 1.5% of the entire world's population died in that war, and one nation, Serbia, by itself, lost 28% of its people. Now, third generation warfare involves speed and maneuverability. Instead of a head on assault, enemy lines were bypassed and then they were attacked in the rear. And this was present to a limited extent in previous wars, particularly when smaller forces had to fight numerically superior forces. But this was the main form of warfare in World War II. If the enemy is massed at point A, then go to point B where they're not. Don't be where expected and be where you're unexpected. And there are many ancient works, such as The Art of War by Sun Tzu, that are still used in military schools today that give understanding of different tactics that fall under third generation warfare, as well as the next category, the fourth generation warfare. Now, throughout history, there have been military geniuses whose works are still used today, such as Napoleon, Sun Tzu, Karl von Clausewitz, Stonewall Jackson, and others. During World War II, about 3% of the world population died in one war. Now, fourth generation warfare blurs the lines between war and politics. It blurs the lines between combatants and civilians. It involves many people who are not part of the state and not part of the official army. They use asymmetric tactics. And this is where we are today. Fourth generation warfare emerged in the wake of World War II and is controlled through terrorists that target civilian populations instead of soldiers. It involves undermining a social cohesion and a destruction of political will. Far too many people want to talk and talk and talk instead of acting. And their words are meaningless and worthless when you're fighting against this kind of tactics. Now, these tactics may involve rioting and other destruction of infrastructure, and undermining of the economy, targeting the weakest in the society. There are no front lines in this kind of warfare, and the battlefield is often urban areas and just everyday life. It prevents actual military from becoming involved easily because the enemy is fluid. They can disappear. And the civilian population in most of the world today is weak. Success is not, in fourth generation warfare, success is not necessarily measured by military victories, but is measured by the erosion of the will of the population to fight the good fight. The population always wants the easy way, so they give in for promises that are almost always empty. How do you develop a military strategy for something like this? In the United States, we've seen a limited implementation of a military strategy for this, but the deep state, the media, the left wing politics, the politicians, they all attack this strategy because those people benefit from those who are perpetrating this warfare. National security is put at risk, and when foreign players are involved, it strains international relations. These tactics are difficult for military forces to adapt to, and the people generally don't do their part. They're either weak or they're part of the problem. And this form of warfare requires innovative solutions to security and defense, and that's hard. And as we know, people want the easy way. They want the pleasant lies rather than the uncomfortable truths. But these things are hard, and the people who once were generally believers, they become completely faithless. And by the people, that includes those within the church, inside the church. My wife was recently watching a female Presbyterian pastor being questioned by a congressman, and that congressman was more biblically literate than that so called pastor. The church has been turned into a country club where it's all fun and games. Proverbs 11:3 from the NET says, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the unfaithful destroys them." Hebrews 3:12, "Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God." Isaiah 5:13, "Therefore my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst." This was given as a warning to Israel, but the warning is still valid for us today. And our people, those within the church, they have no knowledge. They teach a feel good gospel and they avoid the truth in order to avoid an empty pew. The unfaithful are destroyed. And if you think the world is not full of people who have evil hearts of unfaithfulness, then you need to open your eyes. The faithful are few in numbers to stand up to this onslaught. We're commanded to still be faithful, but we know from what the Bible tells us that it's an uphill battle. Now, there's also an idea of fifth generation warfare that was coined by a man named Robert Steele in 2003. It's generally rejected since we're obviously involved in fourth generation warfare. However, I think that it makes sense that it's valid, but it's kind of running congruently with fourth generation warfare instead of replacing it. It's going on at the same time. And what fifth generation warfare is conducted primarily through things such as cyber attacks, misinformation, disinformation, and social engineering, using groups such as the media and other deep state actors. And it often uses autonomous systems and artificial intelligence. It's basically a warfare of information and perception. So I don't think it's replaced fourth generation warfare, but I think it's going along at the same time. It's just evolved into something new. But what does this have to do with Psalm 83? Well, Psalm 83 is a prophecy that foretells of those who are the surrounding nations who are going to attack Israel. Now, I told you we're going to read Psalm 83 in several different translations as we go. Tonight, we're going to read the first 5 verses from the English Standard Version. It says, "O God, do not keep silence. Do not hold your peace or be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they conspire with one accord against you, they make a covenant." There are a lot of people in the world today who deny the right of Israel to exist as a state. A few years back, a high ranking Catholic official stated that Jesus canceled the biblical chosen people. And that's a lie straight from the pits of hell. He's misleading a lot of people when he says that. Because when God makes a promise, God keeps that promise. That may be good or bad for you, depending upon what you're doing or not doing. And sadly, I keep hearing this idea from many other so called Christians today. It's being taught from the pulpit in what was once mainstream denominations. And today, those pulpits side with Hamas and other enemies of Israel against God's chosen people. In Exodus, God said that he saw the oppression of his people, and he did something about it. They're his people. Genesis 15:18. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Abraham was given the oldest title deed in the world by God himself, and God never took that title deed away. It was the land from the Nile to the Euphrates. And when the children of Israel stepped foot outside their doors in the land of Goshen, they were already in their land. They simply had not taken possession of it. Now, not all of Abraham's descendants are Israel. He has other descendants, but some of them have become the enemies of Israel because Israel was given the better part. Now, before God made known his plan to free his people, the Pharaoh had used a form of fourth generation warfare against Israel by destroying their male children. He enslaved the Jews, and he generally got God to enact the promise that was given in Genesis 12:3 that says, And I will bless him that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And in the events that followed that, God showed the world what would happen if they invoked the terms of this promise. Everything that Pharaoh did, or everything that he tried to do, came back at the Egyptians and it affected them. Even today, these events are remembered in cultural traditions and not simply by reading the Bible. They're history. For example, Friday the 13th is still considered bad luck today. And that's because the first Passover happened on the 12th, according to the Jewish calendar. But according to the secular calendar, it was Friday the 13th. Now, in these events that took place in Egypt, the world saw that the Jews were the people of God. And that's generally made a lot of people really angry. But his covenant with Abraham was not conditioned on anything. It was an unconditional covenant. For example, if I tell my granddaughter that I will get her a sugar cookie, I better get it or she's going to be upset. She will remind me, trust me. But if I tell her that if she gets, say, all A's on her report card and I will get her a sugar cookie, and she comes home with B's, she knows that she's not getting that sugar cookie. One's an unconditional promise, one's conditional. God operates the same way. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 6-8 says, For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God has chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he has sworn unto your fathers, as the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. This was not a conditional covenant. Israel is God's chosen people, and they're treasured above all others. Now, as we've studied, and if you've ever read the Bible, you know that they were faithless, but God is always faithful. When the Israelites were on fire for God, they were faithful and obedient, and they were overwhelmingly blessed. But when they were faithless, for example, when they descended into worship of false gods, they paid the price for that. God chastised them rather harshly, not an undeserving harshness, but it was harsh nonetheless. When they were faithless, they suffered drought, they suffered crop failure, they lost military battles. And it was not the people as a whole that were faithless, but it was their leaders. And in fact, most of the Old Testament is about their faithlessness. Modern psychiatry calls this negativity, but this is not negative. It's simply given as a warning for faithlessness. There's one path to faithfulness, but there are many paths away from it. There's one way to be faithful, a lot of ways to be faithless. Genesis 22, verses 15-18. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, By myself have I sworn, says the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. This angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ. And he tells Abraham that because Abraham had obeyed the voice of God, that he would have both a vast earthly seed as the sand on the seashore and a vast heavenly seed as the stars of heaven. This is an unconditional promise. Because Abraham had been faithful, he had been given a promise that was dependent upon nothing else. And as we know, his descendants, they hardened their hearts, they became stiff-necked people, but the promise was irreversible. But one of his descendants would bless the entire earth. We knew who that was, who that is. So when the Jews were dispersed, when he said that they were not his people, he did remind them of the unconditional covenant. Hosea chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. Now when she had weaned Loruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, call his name Lo-Ammi, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, you are my sons of the living God. And sons are mature children. You are the sons of the living God. Then shall the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Can you imagine that sinking feeling that they got when they were told, you're not my people anymore? You know how it feels in the pit of your stomach when something happens that seems absolutely catastrophic in your life? You wreck your new car, you drop your wallet in the lake, you get caught doing something wrong by your parents, things like that. So just think about the feeling when you just know that you're God's chosen people, so you can do whatever you want. And then he says, you're not my chosen people, and I'm not your God. They knew the risk of certain disaster, and they did it anyway. Now, this punishment didn't happen right away. It was a few decades later, after this warning, that they were taken away into captivity. Even then, Daniel prophesied, because while they were being treated as not his people, in reality, they were still his people. Even when Jesus was born, John the Baptizer was still prophesying. Old Testament passages state that the coming Messiah would be a light to the Gentiles. One of the passages that Rabbi Akiva changed in order to make the Jews appear more important is that he removed Isaiah 51:5, which says in the Septuagint, my righteousness speedily draws nigh, and my salvation shall go forth as a light, and on mine arm shall the Gentiles trust. The isles, or the lands across the ocean, shall wait for me, and on my arm shall they trust. And because of this, there are many who mistakenly believe that the Gentiles, or the church, have replaced the Jews. And anyone who believes that, they've either been deceived or they're a liar. Israel is still God's chosen people, and he is still waiting for them to turn to their Messiah, to turn to Yeshua HaMashiach. Jesus the Christ is who they have to turn to. And as much as 85% of the church believes that they have replaced the Jews. And when I think about how degenerate the church has become overall, it's just such a bizarre picture of the circus becoming God's kingdom. The Old Testament also foretold of a second time that Israel would be dispersed. In Matthew 12:24, after they rejected their Messiah, things really went downhill for them, which culminated in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, after which they once again became not my people. Arnold Fruchtenbaum has done some work showing the Old Testament prophecies of two dispersions of the Jews and two returnings of the Jews. In the Old Testament, he shows where it shows the three powers in heaven and things like that. There's a reason that Jesus had thousands of followers. He was not presenting something new. He was simply fulfilling an age-old idea that's contained in the Old Testament. God would not abandon an unconditional covenant because that would defame his name. But he would chastise them for a while. It's about 1900 years worth of chastisement. He couldn't violate his true character, either about an unconditional covenant or about holding his people accountable for their actions. He would keep his promise that he's going to hold them accountable. But to the world, it appeared as if God had failed. And this seems to be a pattern. Satan in the world keeps underestimating God every time they turn around. Romans 11:25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness or hardening in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. We were told in the Old Testament that Israel would become hardened to the point that they would become not my people. We were told in the Old Testament that he came to save Gentiles as well. The mystery is that not all of Israel would be hardened. Not all would be called not my people. There was a remnant of Jews who were believers who were preserved through it all. And we often forget that the church was originally composed completely of Jewish believers. Even today, there are Messianic Jews around the world, including in Israel. Go and try to preach the gospel in Afghanistan and see what happens to you. Yeah, you can go preach it in Israel. You may not make any friends doing it, but you're not going to be executed for doing it. But that number is growing inside of Israel. Romans chapter 9, verses 25 through 26. As he says also in Hosea, I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there they shall be called the sons of the living God. I will call them my people, which were not my people. This literally says, I will call the not my people, my people. That's what the Greek literally says. It doesn't sound right in English, but they're called the not my people, and then they become my people. They will be restored to their position. Ephesians chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. Whereby when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men, as it is now revealed unto his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs and of the same body and partakers of his promise in Christ by the gospel. When I said you will not make any friends if you preach the gospel in Israel, this is part of why. This is the mystery of fellowship. And one of the problems in the New Testament is that, well, in the Old Testament too, but the problems in the New Testament come from the Old Testament. The Masoretic text was copied nearly perfectly by the Masoretes, and the text from which they were copying had been adulterated by Akiba and his buddies up there in order to diminish the importance of the Gentiles, wanted to increase the importance of the Jews, and to hide the fact that Jesus was the Messiah. So these problems with the Old Testament were brought into the New Testament from where the translations come. Therefore, you get some things that were changed slightly, including dates and times. But this mystery of fellowship was hidden. It was a mystery. The Old Testament and New Testament is all tied in together. But God's not going to break his unconditional covenant. Israel's still Israel. They're still God's chosen people. But for the most part, they've hardened themselves, but they will never be destroyed utterly. They all want the good stuff of being heirs, but there are also some rough patches coming up in biblical prophecy. It's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows going from here on out. Now, Ezekiel tells us about when they will go from the not my people status to the my people status. Chapter 36, verses 8 through 12. But you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people of Israel, for they are at hand to come. For behold, I am for you, and I will turn unto you, and you shall be tilled and sown. And I will multiply men upon you, all the house of Israel, even all of it. And the city shall be inhabited, and the way shall be builded. And I will multiply upon you man and beast, and they shall increase and bring fruit. And I will settle you after your old estates, and you will do better unto them than at your beginning. And you shall know that I am the Lord. Yea, I will cause men to walk upon you, even my people Israel, and they shall possess thee, and thou shalt be their inheritance, and thou shalt no more henceforth bereave them of men. So here in this passage, they're once again referred to as my people Israel. They're no longer the not my people. This was prior to May 14th, 1948, because it said they are at hand to come. They're about to come. They will arrive soon. The second time they're referred to as my people Israel, they're already walking upon the Holy Land. It's their possession. In other words, they are my people Israel again already. They're no longer a divided nation, and they've been brought back from around the world. And this all fulfills multiple prophecies. And if you reject Israel as being the people of God, you reject what the Bible plainly teaches. It says, I will bless them who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. We would do well to always keep that in mind. But the not my people will become my people because of the mercy of God. Things in the Old Testament are given to us as types. They were given to Israel as types first, but we can benefit from the same things. We're going to look at some of those. We're going to look at Psalm chapter 42. This is the entire chapter. This is taken from the NET Bible. This is to the chief musician, a maskil for the sons of Korah. As a deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, for the living God. I say, when will I be able to go and appear in God's presence? I cannot eat. I weep day and night. All day long they say to me, where's your God? I will remember and weep. For I was once walking along with the great throng to the temple of God, shouting and giving thanks along with the crowds as we celebrated the holy festival. Why are you depressed, O my soul? Why are you upset? Wait for God, for I will again give thanks to my God for his saving intervention. I am depressed, so I will pray to you while I'm trapped here in the region of the upper Jordan, from Hermon, from Mount Mizar. One deep stream calls out to another at the sound of your waterfalls. All your billows and waves overwhelm me. By day, the Lord decrees his loyal love, and by night, he gives me a song, a prayer to the living God. I will pray to God, my high ridge. Why do you ignore me? Why must I walk around mourning because my enemies oppress me? My enemies' taunts cut into me to the bone as they say to me all day long, where is your God? Why are you depressed, O my soul? Why are you upset? Wait for God, for I will again give thanks to my God for his saving intervention. So the heading of this chapter says that this is a maskil. And this word is associated with several different chapters in the book of Psalms, but it means wise ones. And it carries the idea of instruction for those who have ears to hear. And this is like the wise men who were taught by Daniel during one of the darkest times in the history of Israel. In turn, these students instruct others. And we know that dark times are coming to the earth. Psalm 83 is one of those dark times for Israel, but the entire world will be plunged into a dark time shortly after that. And although these Psalms are given to Israel, just like everything in the Bible, we can apply them to our lives as well. 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now all these things happen to them for ensamples, or for types, and they are written for our admonition upon whom the ends of the world are come. They're given to Israel, but we can use them. And in this specific instance, this wisdom is given to the sons of Korah. Korah was a mighty man of God, right? He wasn't. He was a wicked, and he violated the laws of God, and he led a rebellion against Moses. Numbers chapter 16, verses 30 through 33. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. This man Korah was so wicked that the ground swallowed his family whole. It's just like something out of a movie, except it's real. But this psalm is dedicated to his sons. And this is what demonstrates the grace of God. But why is this important to Israel today? And why is it important to us today as believers? The book of Jude. Verse 9 through 11. Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee. But these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah. Verse 11 says, Woe unto them. These men about whom this passage is speaking, they're all going to go in one of three ways. And I think that we can use these three ways as the model. Most of the ways are going to fall into one of these three categories. The first way is the way of Cain. Cain rejected the blood salvation, and then he spilled his own brother's blood in anger. The second way is the heir of Balaam, who accepted the wages to curse Israel. Balaam's donkey was pretty smart, but Balaam was pretty greedy. Third, you have the gainsaying of Korah. Now, gainsaying is literally anti-word. It's contradiction. People will challenge and contradict the authority and word of God. Do people believe the word of God today? Not even within the church. We saw the video a few weeks ago where the Evangelical Lutheran Church had a list of verses that you can ignore because they're troublesome. They pick and choose the parts they like, and then they reject the rest. They have an appearance of godliness. They go to church, they sit in the pew, they may carry their Bible with them, but they don't read, or at least they don't adhere to the Bible if they do read it. Now, my wife and I, we have a really nice Bible downstairs with lots of beautiful artwork. It just sits there looking nice. We read other copies other than that one, but if that was the only Bible we had, it just sits there. It does no good. But these people, they want to be seen as godly, but they simply don't read or they don't follow what is contained in the Bible. And how many churches today preach and expound upon the Bible? How many churches do you go to? They open the Bible and they study, and they study, and they study. They raise their hands, they clap, they sing, they dance, they feel really good. But there's no doctrine, or very little doctrine. Sometimes a bad doctrine. But it's not godly, it's not biblical. But Psalm 42 was written for the sons of Korah. It's for the Jew who has rejected the truth of God's word. It can be applied to the Christian world just as well. And whoever wrote this psalm, he was discouraged and down. I mean, he's undergoing a great trial. As a deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. Have you ever heard a sermon preached on this passage? I've heard a few. This is often presented as a poetic expression of the writer's love towards God. And as is often the case, they completely miss the point. This is not a poetic and pious feel-good passage. It's for our instruction. It's a maskil. This deer is rising up and looking for streams of water. Maybe she's being chased or hunted and being exhausted. She needs some water to refresh her. This is instruction for Jews during times of tribulation, including the coming great tribulation. This is for those who have ears to hear. The deer instinctively wants the water that God creates, and this psalm is telling the sons of Korah to respond to this inner desire and return to the Creator. Return to receiving the one who will satisfy them. And we can apply this to ourselves as well. We have to respond to God. We have to want to be a part of something bigger than what we have or what we are. And responding to God is the only thing that will satisfy our souls. God is the source of all water, both literal and spiritual. In the beginning, there's no water. But then sin arrives, and God judges the earth, covering it with water, and the world is cleansed. And one day, there will be no more sea again. John chapter 7, verses 37 through 38. In the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, saying, If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believes on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Revelation 22:17. And the Spirit and the bride say, Come, and let him that hears say, Come, and let him that is athirst come. and whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. God's the source of that water. And anybody who's rejected his word in the past, they must drink of his water. My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, where is thy God? This is today. People say, if God is so great, why are the churches empty? Where's your God? Or they say, if God's so great, why do bad things happen? They don't understand. This is what will be said to the Jews during their times of tribulation. I will remember and weep, for I was once walking along with the great throng to the temple of God, shouting and giving thanks along with the crowds as we celebrated the holy festival. The writer of this psalm is going with the crowds to the house of God, but yet he is despondent. They observe the days, the feast days, and they sing the songs, but yet they say, where's your God? People don't want God today. Well, they want God as a make-a-wish good luck charm, but they don't want to be faithful to God. They don't want the real God. They don't want him telling them what to do. And instead of saying, how can I serve you? They say, my bank account is empty, give me more. And then when there is no more, they say, where's your God? I prayed for money, he didn't give it to me. Being faithful is hard. And in Genesis 6, God sent a flood to destroy the evil and violence out of the land, the Nephilim. Today, men want that violence, and it seems they want the Nephilim to return. Men love pleasure more than they love God, and the writer of Psalm 42 thinks he's been forgotten. Why are you depressed, O my soul? Why are you upset? Wait for God, for I will again give thanks to my God for his saving intervention. So this writer desires to know God, but he's thirsty and he's depressed. I'm depressed, so I will pray to you while I'm trapped here in the region of the upper Jordan, from Hermon, from Mount Mizar. He doesn't know what to do. Have you ever felt helpless like that? You don't know what to do. Everything's hopeless. I will pray to God, my high ridge. Why do you ignore me? Why must I walk around mourning because my enemies oppress me? The church today is in a mess. He's depressed. What keeps us going when everything seems so bad? By day, the Lord decrees his loyal love, and by night, he gives me a song, a prayer to the living God. This is like Job, whose song was with him in the night. And although this is directed to the Jews directly as a type, we can use it as a type as well. Matthew 26:26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. This is the reference back to Psalm 41:9 that says, yea, mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. Then continuing on, verses 27 and 28, 30. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, drink you all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. God will preserve his people. This is demonstrated all throughout the Bible. Sometimes only one or two may escape a situation, but his people will be preserved. Psalm 42:8. Yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. So just like Korah, Israel's failed. We've all failed to some degree, but Korah was rather contemptuous about it. In Psalm 89, verses 31 through 33, if they break my statutes and keep not my commandments, then will I visit their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. Nevertheless, my loving kindness will I not utterly take from him, nor suffer my faithfulness to fail. We will fail. God will never fail us. He will not break his unconditional covenant that he made with Israel because of his loving kindness. Men may or may not keep their words, but God will always accomplish his work. Psalm 42:11. Why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him who is the health of my countenance and my God. Throughout the book of Psalms, we see several of them start out with, "Praise you, the Lord." Why is that? The writer of Psalm 42 has the end in sight. When things get bad, we have to see the end. If you're faithful, life is not going to be quiet and peaceable for you. Do you want to be normal? I had this discussion with my granddaughter today. In this world, if you want to be normal, there's something wrong with you. The only thing as faithful believers, the only thing we're promised in this world is persecution. If we are faithful, we're going to have a life of persecution. We're promised great rewards in the age to come if we're faithful, but now we will receive persecution. And as the song says, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. These Psalms are talking about the coming millennial kingdom. But before then, Israel will receive more persecution. But if we're faithful, and if Israel's faithful, the end will be great. Revelation 5, verses 12 through 13, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and such as are in the sea, and all that are in them, heard I saying, Blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him that sits upon the throne and upon the Lamb forever and ever." When things get bad, this is the end that we need to have our sight set upon. And when you look around the world at faithful Christians who have very little, they're being persecuted to death in Nigeria, they're being crucified. In Syria, they're being crucified and beheaded. The whole thing going on in Haiti that we've talked about so much. These people are faithful Christians. They devote their lives to Jesus Christ, and they have very little. And they're being persecuted much more severely than we are for it. Where is their God? Is it worth it? It obviously is, because they have the end in their sights. One day, faithful believers will receive great rewards, and every creature will sing glory to the Lamb of God that was slain. And the Jews are once again the people of God. They're no longer the not my people. The people of God have full possession of their land, or at least part of it. But they're no longer divided. The land is productive, the cities are inhabited, and the only thing that may be missing is that although they have full autonomy, the entire land is from the Nile to the Euphrates. However, as we noticed earlier, those are also the descendants of Abraham. Israel will one day control that entire area. Ezekiel 25:14. And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel. And they shall do in Edom according to mine anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord God. Psalm 83, verses 5 through the first part of 6. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites. So Psalm 83 prophesies about this major campaign with all these different nations conspiring to completely exterminate the Jewish people. Edom is named first with the Ishmaelites in the same phrase. These are all Arab Muslim nations that directly border the land of Israel. And this war is described in Psalm 83, and Ezekiel describes the judgment on the nations. Now, one thing to keep in mind with prophecy is that when a nation is named, it can be referring to the descendants of the people, or it can be referring to the place. And sometimes the people and place are still the same, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the people are spread out. Sometimes they spread out across the entire planet. Sometimes you have to dig a little. Who is Edom? The Edomites are judged in the Bible more than any other nation. And that's relevant to us today because there are unfulfilled prophecies in which they're involved. If we're to know these things, which we should want to know because of our involvement in the end times, we have to work to dig out the nuggets of truth. Ezekiel 35, verses 5 through 6. Because thou, this is talk about Mount Seir, which is Edom, but because thou, Edom, has had a perpetual hatred, an eternal hatred, and has shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end. Therefore, as I live, says the Lord God, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. The covenant birthright caused friction between Sarah and Hagar. Now remember, Hagar was an Egyptian woman, and in the New Testament, Egypt is used as a type of the world. But there's also a friction between Isaac and Ishmael. And this pictures a child under grace against a child under law. And the perpetual hatred began with Jacob and Esau while they were still in the womb. Genesis 25:32. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? Esau did not esteem the birthright, so he sold it for a bowl of soup. And actually, the bowl of soup was a sign of their agreement. It was not the purchase price. But for reasons we've cited in the past, Esau was on the run from Nimrod's people because he had killed Nimrod, and he didn't have enough faith in God to protect him. At this point, Esau was the rightful heir. But he gave that birthright to Jacob. Later, he repented, but he'd already blown it. In response, he threw a temper tantrum, then intermarried with Ishmaelites. And the perpetual hatred continues into our current time today. And this perpetual hatred is carried on through Islam. We need to understand that if we are to understand the implications with events in the end times. We see these fulfilled prophecies every day if we pay attention. And it's also important to remember that Islam is not really just a religion. It's a political movement that uses religion to carry out its mission. Interestingly, I was looking at some emails this week from the Jeffrey Epstein files. There's a strong link and several mentions of the link between the ritual child sexual abuse, both on Epstein Island and in Islam. Islam is evil, but both Epstein's religion and Islam, they're both pagan and they're both very important in eschatology. But make no mistake about it, Islam is evil, but it's a political movement more than a religious movement. But after Israel left Egypt, they wanted to pass through Edom and they were denied passage. And if you have a map of Edom in the back of your Bible, you could probably ignore it because most maps show the land of Edom as being only the little tiny bit east of the Jordan River and south of the land of Moab. However, if you study history, you find out that because of their neighbors to the east, they were kind of driven out of their land, they moved west, and then they established their own land, which they called Idumea. Edom, Idumea. To the west of Edom were trade routes, and the land was much more fertile than the deserts and jagged mountains of actual Edom itself. Not to mention, they were family. Remember, Esau was Jacob's brother. Now, Hebron, which you can see here in the map, this became their new capital, and Hebron's only 19 miles south of Jerusalem. Hebron was established about 1,500 years prior, and when Babylon took Judah captive, Babylon didn't destroy Hebron. When Judah was taken into captivity, the Babylonian soldiers destroyed Jerusalem and they killed many of her people, and the Edomites cheered them on. Psalm 137, verses 7 and 9. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. Happy shall he be that takes and dashes thy little ones against the stones. The Edomites, they shouted, take it to the ground, burn the city all the way down, and bash their babies' heads in. They were cheering this violence on. They wanted to wipe out the Jews, although they themselves were family. Now, the Edomites kept Hebron until Judas Maccabeus retook the city and put it under control of the Jews in about 164 BC. Then in 126 BC, they once again had to be conquered by the Jews under the high priest John Hyrcanus. And at that point, the Idumeans, and this is what they were calling themselves at that point, they were no longer calling themselves Edomites, but the Idumeans were forced to convert to Judaism, or they had to run, or they were going to die. And as always happens, forcing people to convert never works. Many of them pretended to be Jews, but they really weren't Jews. That should sound familiar. Revelation 2:9, I know thy works in tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. So Julius Caesar appointed the Idumean Antipater, and Antipater is a Greek word that means like the father. Uh, think about that one for a minute in this circumstance here. But Caesar appointed the Idumean Antipater as procurator or as his agent over Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. And this is about 47 BC. About 10 years later, the Romans appointed Herod, who is the son of Antipater, as king over Israel. In other words, the Herods of the New Testament were all Edomites. One of them killed all the babies while he was trying to destroy the coming Messiah. Another one murdered John the Baptizer. And then another one killed James, the brother of John. To the Romans, these Herods were almost Jews. And they liked that idea better than the true Jews because the Idumeans didn't like the true Jews. And by the time Jesus was born, the Idumeans, the Edomites, they had been in Israel for about 500 years. And what we see in the news today, the fighting between Arabs and Israelites is simply the same hatred that began in Genesis 25. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes specifics get blurred and it's difficult to follow bloodlines. Other bloodlines are also important today, which we'll hopefully get to look at one day. But sometimes the water gets muddied for us. And the same was true of the Romans. They had a hard time telling the difference between the Idumeans and the Jews, the almost Jews and the Jews. So when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, there were problems among the Zealots, the Idumeans, and the Orthodox Jews. Now, Idumean infantry killed many of the Orthodox Jews, but at the same time, there were many Idumeans who fought alongside the Jews against the Romans. It was kind of mixed up there. And this is something else we see today. Not all Arab Muslims are enemies of Israel. So the Idumeans, not all of them were enemies of the Jews at the time. But when they went to battle, many of them were killed, many were sold to slavery, and about 40,000 were just simply set free by Caesar. But to the Romans, they could no longer see the hatred of the Idumeans as being something distinctive. They couldn't tell the difference. And you have to remember, the Jewish leaders hated Jesus, and so their selected and preferred Messiah, Bar Kokhba, led a revolt to take Jerusalem. He had about 200,000 soldiers, and they did retake Jerusalem for a while, along with many strongholds throughout the nation. This really ticked off the Emperor Hadrian, so he called in many legions of Roman soldiers to destroy the Jewish insurgents, and in total, more than 500,000 Jews lost their lives. Obviously, this is more than soldiers because there were only about 200,000 soldiers. Now, because of the revolt, Hadrian understood that he had to destroy Jewish nationalism or the problem would once again rise up in the future. And the things that tied the Jewish society together had to be destroyed. Things such as the Sabbath, reading the Torah publicly, and circumcision. These things became capital offenses. If you got caught observing the Sabbath, you died. They also chose to rename the area in order to destroy the name for the nationalism. And they had to choose between Idumea or Philistia. And since they could no longer clearly distinguish between Idumeans and Jews, remember, they were almost Jews. They were still family in the eyes of the Romans. They chose to name it after the greatest enemies of the Jews, who were the Philistines. Therefore, the land became Palestina, which is the Latin for Philistia. And ancient maps before this time showed Idumea, but after the Bar Kokhba revolt in about 135 AD, Idumea disappeared and Palestina appeared. The Edomites became Idumeans, who became the Palestinians of today. Psalm 83:6, the first part. The tabernacles or the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. So the tents of Edom refers to the refugee camps that are used in the propaganda of the Palestinian Authority today. The Idumeans spread out across the world, mostly the Arab world, but some of them also went beyond that, and they were brought back as a propaganda tactic to say that they were displaced from their home, which is actually the home of the Jews. But to go a step further, there were many, and if you go online, by the way, you can look at pictures of the refugee camps. They still live in tents. They lived in tents then, they still live in tents today. But when you go a step further beyond where we are right now, there are many Orthodox Jews who view all globalists as Edomites. It's a term that they use to refer to Rome or to any ruling empire, and sometimes even groups of people. Now, Amskel Moses Bauer, who was a goldsmith, opened a coin shop in Frankfurt, Germany in 1743. Above his door, he hung a sign that was a red shield with a Roman eagle. Now, there's a connection here with the New Testament with the red shield having to do with the prophetic things in the parables. You also have the eagle, which, remember our study on the birds are never presented in a good light, but the same things that they had on their coins then, if you compare them side by side, showed the head of the emperor on the front, and on the back, it was usually a bird, either an eagle or an owl. And the eagle is important prophetically, and the owl is a mystical symbol. Even today, American money has a phoenix on the back that's supposed to represent an eagle, and we'll do that later. But his coin shop became known as the Red Shield firm because of the red shield. Well, Amskel had a son who was Meyer Amskel Bauer. Meyer possessed a really great intellectual ability from an early age, so his father spent a lot of time teaching him everything he could about finance and money lending. After the elder Bauer died in 1755, Meyer went to work as a clerk in a bank that were owned by the Oppenheimers. And his ability was recognized, and Meyer quickly rose in prominence in the firm. Then his success allowed him to return to Frankfurt and purchase a business his father had established several years earlier. Now, at the business, the big red shield was still over the door, and by now, Meyer understood the significance of the red shield, represented Rome, and his father used it as his emblem based upon the red flag, which was the emblem of the revolutionary Jews in Eastern Europe, who may be almost Jews. Now, keep in mind, Edomites were considered Jews to the rest of the world. And after understanding the significance of this, Meyer Amskel Bauer changed his name to Rothschild. And that's a German word that means red shield. And this is when the house of Rothschild was born. Now, this name's going to come up more in the future, and you may already be familiar with it. But when Meyer worked for the Oppenheimers, he learned one very important thing. It's far more profitable to loan money to kings and governments than it is to loan it to private individuals. After all, when you loan to kings and governments, the loans were larger. They were not going to default because all they had to do is raise taxes to pay back the loan. And remember, wealth creates power, and power is the motivator for certain people. Now, Meyer Amskel Rothschild, he had 5 sons. They were named Amskel also, Solomon, Nathan, Carl, and Jacob. And Meyer dedicated himself to teaching them the secret techniques, the mysteries, if you will, but the secret techniques of money creation and manipulation. Money creation and manipulation. This family is the source of the fiat money that we use today. Now, fiat money is paper currency that is simply declared to be money without being backed by anything, and is easily manipulated by those in power, and any politician who tries to establish a sound currency will find himself in the crosshairs of very powerful people, and quite frequently literal crosshairs. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. So this money creation, this fiat money is nothing but debt. This piece of paper, and actually here, is $100 bills in the photo, these pieces of paper, they have no intrinsic value. And it's created out of thin air by creating a note of debt and simply distributing it. All the major currencies in the world are fiat currency. And this means that you are servant to the lender. You're servant to the government. And there's no way to avoid it. And this is the system under which you're forced to exist, and it's evil and it's oppressive. And anytime they print more money, every dollar that you have becomes worth less, and it takes more dollars to buy the same thing. It creates inflation, which creates more poverty, and it also creates more power for those in power. And while I'm not going to post it again, remember Ephesians 6:12, which by now you should have printed out on your desk somewhere, but it tells us that the government is the enemy, and they're on the same side as the powers of darkness. So the descendants of Meyer Rothschild are part of the bloodline that controls this power. It's a power not only over the people, but also over the kings and governments of the world. And the Bible warns us about this, and it's here, and we have to deal with it. Now, Rothschild's sons, they went to major capitals in Europe to open branch offices of the family banking business. In 1838, Nathan Rothschild said, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes the laws." This is the power behind the power. We're servants of the lender, and we're all forced to borrow. And a few years back, there were some war games that took place, and a famous economist was brought in to observe things. And after observing, he made one change to the computer simulation, and it changed the outcome of the war. That one change was he created a sound currency that was backed by a solid commodity with no ability to print more currency than there was the commodity. And that nation conquered everybody else. In other words, what he did, it freed those who were slaves to the fiat currency, the currency that's created from debt, and it allowed them to dominate the world. And this is why a sound currency is dangerous to those who are pulling the strings. Now, this is just the beginning, and it continues with Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, the secret meetings on Jekyll Island in which the Federal Reserve was created. And the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve, so it's pure deception. And then you have other powerful groups, and often these groups are overlapping with the same people, and they all want global power. They will use anything at their disposal to gain and maintain that power. It's evil, and we've been warned about it. And many of these people are called Jews, and many of them are almost Jews. They're descended from the Edomites. Some of them have perpetuated a very offensive form of Zionism in order to create conflict. And some of them are actually anti-Semitic. They hate the true Jews. But these are the descendants of the Edomites in the modern world today. They appear as Jews, but they are not. Revelation 2:9. And I know thy works, and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Revelation 3:9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, but are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. The Bible spends more time on Edom than on any other of Israel's enemies. Their descendants were spread far and wide, and they tie in directly to what is happening in the world right now. And we're out of time right now, but we're going to pick up here next week, and we're going to go through the book of Obadiah, which deals with the Edomites extensively. Genesis 12:3. And I will bless him that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. This is what's happening today. It's blessings and cursings, because God will keep his promises.